There have been few figures throughout history that have made such a dramatic impact on Europe as Napoleon Bonaparte. He was born in Corsica in 1769 and rose to power during the French Revolution and eventually became the Emperor of the French. His wars reshaped Europe, and he contested and had a huge amount of success. He was seen as a military genius, but was also hated by some, as he was regarded as a tyrant, and his enemies saw him as a formidable foe. But in the final days of his life, he was living as a prisoner of his enemies, and he died in exile far from the battlefields that he once dominated. But his death on the remote island of St Helena is one which is debated. But 20 years after this, his coffin was broken open, and what was discovered was shocking and remarkable. Today we look at what happened when Napoleon's coffin was opened, and to support, please make sure to subscribe. After his crushing defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in the June of 1815, Napoleon surrendered to the British, hoping perhaps to live quietly in England. Instead, the British government decided to remove him as a threat once and for all, and they sent him to St Helena, a volcanic island in the South Atlantic Ocean, nearly 1,200 miles from the coast of Africa, and even farther from Europe. St Helena was a bleak and isolated place. The British authorities, led by Governor Sir Hudson Lowe, made sure Napoleon could never escape. His residence, Longwood House, was damp, windswept and far from comfortable. Although he was allowed a small group of loyal followers, including generals and servants, he lived under constant supervision, with his movements restricted, and for 6 years, from 1815 to 1821, Napoleon lived in this enforced exile. He spent his days dictating his memoirs, walking in the garden and reflecting on his extraordinary career. But as the years passed, his health began to fail. By 1817, Napoleon started complaining of stomach pains, fatigue and nausea. His once robust figure grew heavier, and he often appeared weak. Observers noted that he became less active, preferring to stay indoors, and Napoleon himself feared that he might be suffering from the same illness that killed his father, Carlo Bonaparte, who died at 39 from what was thought to be stomach cancer. The emperor suspected this hereditary weakness, and his fears were only reinforced as his symptoms worsened. His doctor on St Helena debated his condition. Some believed it was stomach cancer, others thought it was a stomach ulcer or liver disease, and medical care on the island was limited, and disagreements among the doctors often led to confusion rather than effective treatment. By 1820, Napoleon's health had taken a sharp decline. He was often bedridden, unable to take long walks, and suffered from swelling in his legs and abdomen. He lost his appetite, and his once commanding voice grew weaker. In early 1821, it became clear Napoleon was dying. He spent much of his time lying on sofa or bed, too weak to do much else. His companions, including General Bertrand and Count Montholon, remained by his side, recording his words and caring for him. Despite his suffering, Napoleon remained mentally sharp, often dictating notes and giving instructions about how he wanted his story told to future generations. On May 3, 1821, Napoleon's condition became critical. He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring about France, his army, and his son, the Duke of Reichstadt, who was living in Austria. On May the 5th, a violent storm lashed the island, and Napoleon lay unconscious in Longwood House, attended by his companions and doctors. At 5:49 in the evening, he breathed his last. He was 51 years old, and his final recorded words were, "France, armée, tête d'armée, Josephine." France, army, head of the army, Josephine. Whether these exact words were spoken or shaped later by those around him is uncertain, but they reflect the main themes of his life: his country, his soldiers, his first wife, Josephine de Beauharnais, who had died years before. The day after his death, an autopsy was carried out by his doctors, including the British physician Francesco Antomarchi. They reported that Napoleon's stomach was in a dreadful state, with a large ulcer, which appeared to be cancer. This seemed to confirm Napoleon's own fears of hereditary illness. However, not everyone agreed. In the decades that followed, alternative theories arose. Some argued that Napoleon had been poisoned, possibly with arsenic, either by his British captors or by one of his companions. Supporters of this theory point to the presence of arsenic in hair samples said to belong to him. Others argue that arsenic was commonly found in wallpaper dyes and medicines of the time, and that the slow poisoning was unlikely. Most modern historians and doctors now believe Napoleon did indeed die of stomach cancer, worsened by the poor living conditions on St Helena. Napoleon's body was dressed in his favourite uniform, a green coat with the chasseurs of the Imperial Guard, white breeches and boots. On his chest rested the Légion d'honneur medal. He was buried on May 9, 1821, in a valley near Longwood House. The site was chosen by Napoleon himself, shaded by willow trees and far from the sea winds. The British buried him without his name on the tombstone, simply inscribing a "Here lies," a deliberate decision, as they feared his grave might become a shrine for Bonapartists. Napoleon's remains did not stay in St Helena's forever. In 1840, nearly 2 decades after his death, King Louis-Philippe of France arranged for his body to be brought back to Paris, known as the Retour des Cendres, Return of the Ashes. This event was accompanied by grand ceremonies, and on the 15th of October 1840, the grave of Napoleon was opened in the presence of French and British witnesses. Many had seen the original interment. With a huge amount of force, 2 layers of cement were broken, the giant stone slab was lifted up, and the outer mahogany coffin appeared to be intact and only had slight traces of the effects of humidity and dampness. There were 2 holes drilled into the coffin to allow any possible gases to escape, in the hope the body would not have exploded. The casket was brought out of the tomb, and inside there was a lead coffin which contained the body. The outer wooden coffin was not nailed and was resting, and when the lead coffin was opened, it was remarkable what was discovered. The body of Napoleon appeared to be intact, and it was in an unbelievable state of conservation, and was quite clear Napoleon was inside. There were around 3 or 4 minutes of Napoleon's body. His skin appeared very white. His body was confirmed to have been well preserved. His hat was placed across his legs, and a silver vase crowned with an imperial eagle contained his heart, and this was found near to the body. After this, the body of Napoleon was lifted from the coffin and transferred to an elaborate sarcophagus, which was then leaded onto a specifically constructed and ornamented hearse to be repatriated back to France. On December 15, 1840, Napoleon's coffin was placed in a magnificent tomb in Les Invalides, Paris, the French capital which he had once ruled. It became his final resting place, and to this day visitors can see his grand red sarcophagus under the Golden Dome, one of the most visited sites in Paris. Now, Napoleon's death closed the chapter on a man who had dominated European politics for 2 decades. His exile was lonely, and it became a lonely end and was part of the legend, showing the fall of a man who had once crowned himself emperor. To his supporters, he was a tragic hero, a brilliant leader brought low by cruel fate. To his enemies, his death was the fitting end of a tyrant who had caused endless war. But what was found when his coffin was opened was shocking and remarkable. It showed Napoleon's body had been preserved very well, and it had been embalmed with such skill there had been no decay at all. Today, Napoleon's remains inside his tomb in Paris, many miles from where he actually died, and people still flock to see the sarcophagus. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.